I woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of snow hitting my bedroom window, and I knew immediately that today was going to be hell. Not because of the weather, but because of what happened the last time I tried to be a responsible neighbor in Pinewood Grove, our supposedly charming little subdivision just outside Boulder, Colorado. My name is Ethan Walsh, and I have lived in this community for 3 years now. When I first moved here, I thought it was perfect. The houses were well maintained, the streets were clean, and everyone seemed friendly enough. What I did not realize was that beneath that veneer of suburban perfection lurked an HOA board more concerned with arbitrary rules than common sense, led by a woman who would make any reasonable person question the concept of community governance. That woman's name was Brenda Patterson, and she was the president of the Pinewood Grove HOA. Brenda was 52 years old, drove a white Lexus SUV, and had that particular haircut that seemed to be standard issue for women who spent their days finding problems where none existed. You know the one I am talking about. Short, layered, highlighted, and always perfectly styled even at 7 in the morning when she would patrol the neighborhood looking for violations. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the incident that started this whole mess. It was January 15th, about 3 weeks before this current snowstorm. We had gotten 6 inches of snow overnight, and I woke up around 5:30 to clear my driveway and sidewalk before heading to work. I am a software engineer, and I usually start work by 7, so getting up early to shovel was just part of my routine during winter. I figured it was the responsible thing to do. Get the sidewalk clear before kids walked to the bus stop, before the mail carrier made their rounds, before anyone could slip and fall. I was out there in my driveway, working by the light of my porch lamp and a headlamp I wore, making good progress. The snow was that perfect consistency, not too wet, not too powdery, just right for shoveling. I had finished my driveway and was working on the public sidewalk in front of my house when I heard a car pull up behind me. I turned around and saw Brenda's white Lexus idling at the curb, her window rolling down. Even in the dim light, I could see the expression on her face, that particular look of someone who had just caught you doing something they considered wrong. "Ethan," she called out, her voice sharp in the quiet morning air. "What do you think you are doing?" I stopped shoveling and leaned on my shovel, confused. "Good morning, Brenda. Just clearing the sidewalk before work, trying to be neighborly. At this hour." She glanced at the clock on her dashboard. "It is 5:45 in the morning. You are in violation of community quiet hours." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. "I am shoveling snow, Brenda. I am not running a chainsaw." Her face hardened. The community guidelines clearly state that no outdoor maintenance activities are permitted before 7 a.m. on weekdays. This includes lawn mowing, power tool use, and yes, snow removal. You are creating a disturbance. A disturbance. Brenda, I am using a plastic shovel. The only sound is snow hitting snow. The scraping noise is disruptive. I have received complaints. I looked around at the dark houses surrounding us. Complaints from who? Everyone is asleep. That is not your concern. What is your concern is following the rules. I am issuing you a warning. If I catch you doing outdoor maintenance before 7 a.m. again, you will be fined. I stood there in disbelief as she rolled up her window and drove off, her taillights disappearing around the corner. I looked down at my half-cleared sidewalk, then at my watch. It was not even 6 in the morning. I had been trying to do something helpful, something safe, and I was being threatened with a fine for it. But I figured it was just Brenda being Brenda. Everyone in the neighborhood knew she could be petty. I finished my sidewalk, made a mental note to check the actual community guidelines when I got home from work, and went about my day. That evening, I pulled out my copy of the HOA covenant that I had received when I bought the house. I went through it page by page, and sure enough, buried in Section 14, subsection C, there it was. No outdoor maintenance activities, including but not limited to lawn care, exterior repairs, or snow removal, shall be conducted before 7 a.m. or after 9 p.m. on weekdays, or before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m. on weekends. It seemed insane to me. What was the point of having a rule that prevented people from clearing snow early? The whole point of clearing snow was to do it before people needed to use the walkways. But there it was in black and white, and I knew Brenda would enforce it. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. Despite her warning, despite the fact that I had not violated the rule again, I was being fined $50 for my early morning snow removal. The letter cited the exact section of the covenant, included a timestamp from Brenda's dashboard camera showing me shoveling at 5:45 a.m., and demanded payment within 30 days. I was furious. I called Brenda immediately. Pinewood Grove HOA, Brenda speaking. Brenda, it is Ethan Walsh. I just got a fine in the mail for shoveling snow. You said it was a warning. I said if I caught you again, you would be fined. But upon review with the board, we determined that a fine was appropriate even for a first offense. The rule is very clear, Ethan. This is ridiculous. I was trying to help the community. You were breaking the rules. There is a proper time for snow removal. If you cannot remove snow during approved hours, you can hire a service that will do it during those times. And what if someone slips and falls on unshoveled snow because I waited until 7 a.m.? Then you would be liable for not maintaining your property. Have a good day, Ethan. She hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. I was being fined for clearing snow too early, but I would also be liable if I did not clear it at all. It was a catch-22 designed to generate revenue for the HOA and give Brenda power over the residents. I decided to fight it. I requested a hearing with the HOA board, which was my right according to the covenant. The hearing was scheduled for February 1st, 2 weeks away. In the meantime, another snowstorm hit. 4 inches, nothing major. I waited until exactly 7 a.m. to go outside and shovel. By that time, 3 of my neighbors had already slipped on their icy sidewalks. One of them, an elderly woman named Margaret who lived 2 houses down, fell hard enough that her son had to take her to the emergency room. She was fine, just bruised, but it drove home how stupid this rule really was. The hearing was held in the community center, a small building near the entrance to our subdivision. The board consisted of Brenda, a treasurer named Tom Holbrook who barely spoke, and a secretary named Linda Marshall who seemed to just go along with whatever Brenda wanted. I presented my case calmly and rationally. I explained that I was trying to be a good neighbor, that early morning snow removal prevented accidents, and that the sound of shoveling snow was not disruptive enough to justify preventing it during safe, reasonable hours. Brenda listened with her arms crossed, that pinched expression on her face that I was coming to know very well. "Are you finished?" she asked when I stopped talking. "Yes. The rule exists for a reason, Ethan. People have a right to peace and quiet in their homes. If we allow one person to skirt the rules, everyone will want to. The fine stands. $50 due by February 15th. What about Margaret? She fell because nobody had cleared their sidewalk yet. What about the mail carrier who slipped on ice yesterday? What about the kids walking to the bus stop who have to navigate patches of ice because people are forced to wait until 7 to shovel? Those are separate issues. If property owners are not maintaining their sidewalks, that is a different violation that we will address accordingly. So you will fine people for not shoveling, and you will fine people for shoveling too early. How does that make any sense? Brenda leaned forward. It makes sense because those are the rules, Ethan. And if you do not like the rules, you are free to sell your home and move somewhere else. Now, is there anything else? I realized I was not going to win. The board voted 3-0 to uphold the fine. I paid it because I did not want to deal with the escalating penalties that would come if I refused, but I was angry. Really angry. That brings us to today, February 5th. The snowstorm that woke me up at 5 a.m. was a big one. By the time the sun started to rise, we had 10 inches of snow on the ground, and it was still coming down. The weather forecast said we could expect another 4 to 6 inches before it stopped around noon. I lay in bed, warm and comfortable, listening to the wind howl outside. Normally, I would have been up and out there already clearing my driveway and sidewalk. But not today. Today, I was going to follow the rules exactly as written. At 7 a.m. precisely, I got dressed and went outside. My driveway was buried, my sidewalk was invisible under a blanket of white, and the temperature had dropped enough that the top layer was already starting to ice over. I started shoveling my driveway first, taking my time. It took me nearly 90 minutes to clear it because the snow was heavy and wet. By the time I finished the driveway, it was 8:30. I went inside, made myself some coffee, and watched through my front window as my neighbors struggled with their own snow removal. Most of them were out there clearing their walks, getting it done before the snow turned to ice. I noticed that Brenda's house, which was 3 doors down and across the street, had a professional snow removal service. A truck with a plow cleared her driveway in minutes, and 2 guys with snow blowers cleared her sidewalk. They were finished by 8:45. I sipped my coffee and decided something. I was going to follow the HOA rules to the absolute letter from now on. Nothing more, nothing less. See, there was something I had noticed when I read through that covenant after getting my fine. The HOA was responsible for maintaining all common areas, including the main walkways that connected different sections of the neighborhood, the paths through the community park, and the sidewalks around the community center and pool area. These were heavily used areas, especially the main walkways. People used them as shortcuts. Kids used them to get to the bus stop, and during winter, they were essential for safe passage through the neighborhood. But there was no specific timeline in the covenant for when the HOA had to clear these common areas. It just said they were responsible for maintenance. I went back outside around 9 a.m. and cleared my sidewalk, but only the section that was technically my property. The covenant stated that homeowners were responsible for the sidewalk directly in front of their homes, which was interpreted as the section running along their property line. What I did not do was clear the extra bit of sidewalk at the corner, even though I usually did. That corner section was technically common area, even though it was right at the edge of my property. I also did not touch the main walkway that ran behind my house, even though I had often cleared the section near my back gate as a courtesy. By noon, the snow had stopped. The sun came out, but the temperature stayed below freezing. That wet, heavy snow started to turn into ice. I went about my day, working from my home office, taking breaks to look out the window. I watched as people walked carefully along the sidewalks that had been cleared. I also watched as several people tried to use the main walkway behind my house and the other main walkway on the south side of the neighborhood. These paths were still buried under 10 inches of snow, and the few people who tried to use them ended up post-holing through with every step, eventually giving up and taking the long way around on the street. By evening, I saw Brenda's white Lexus cruising through the neighborhood. She was doing her patrol, looking for violations. I wondered if she would notice the uncleared common areas, or if she would just focus on finding homeowners to harass. The next morning, I woke up to an interesting sight. The sun was out. The temperature had risen to just above freezing during the day but dropped back down overnight. The main walkways, which still had not been cleared, were now covered in a layer of ice. The snow had melted just enough on top to turn slushy, then refroze overnight into a bumpy, treacherous skating rink. I saw 3 people try to use the main walkway that morning. All 3 nearly fell. One guy did fall, landing hard on his hip. He got up slowly, clearly in pain, and limped back the way he had come. My phone rang around 8 a.m. It was my neighbor, Pete, who lived next door. "Hey, Ethan, did you see the walkways? They are a mess." "Yeah, I saw. Pretty bad. Think we should call the HOA. They are supposed to maintain those. I mean, you can try. Let me know what they say." I was curious to see how this would play out. Pete was a good guy, a retired teacher in his 60s. He had lived in Pinewood Grove longer than I had and generally got along with everyone, even Brenda. An hour later, Pete called me back. I talked to Brenda. She said their snow removal contractor had mechanical problems and could not get to the walkways yesterday. They are supposed to come out today. Did she say when? She said they would get here when they could. She seemed annoyed that I called. I bet she did. But the snow removal contractor did not come that day, or the next day, or the day after that. By February 8th, 3 days after the snowstorm, the main walkways through Pinewood Grove had become genuinely dangerous. The ice was thick and uneven, impossible to traverse safely. People had stopped even trying to use them, but that created a different problem. Everyone was forced to walk on the streets instead, which were narrow and did not have sidewalks. With cars trying to navigate and people walking in the road, it was only a matter of time before something bad happened. That something happened on February 9th. A middle school kid named Jason was walking to his bus stop along the street because the walkway was impassable. A car came around the corner too fast, did not see him in time because he was partially hidden by a snowbank, and clipped him with the side mirror. Jason was knocked down but thankfully not seriously hurt. Some bruises, a scraped elbow, but it could have been so much worse. Jason's mother, Nicole Harris, was absolutely livid. She marched down to the HOA office that afternoon, and from what I heard later, she did not hold back. She demanded to know why the walkways had not been cleared, why children were being forced to walk in the street, and what the HOA planned to do about it. Brenda apparently told her that they were working on it and that the contractor would be there soon. The contractor finally showed up on February 10th, 5 days after the storm. But by then, the ice on the walkways was so thick and hard that their equipment could not remove it effectively. They scraped off the top layer but left behind a bumpy, slippery base that was still dangerous. More people started complaining. The HOA Facebook page, which I lurked on but never posted to, was blowing up with angry residents demanding to know why the walkways were in such terrible condition. Some people pointed out that this had never been a problem in previous winters, and they wanted answers. Brenda posted a response blaming the contractor and the weather, saying it was an unusual situation and that they were doing their best. I knew better. I had lived here for 3 winters now, and I had watched what happened after snowstorms. In previous years, there had been a different contractor, a local guy named Dave who had been prompt and thorough. But at some point, the HOA had switched contractors to save money, hiring the cheapest bid they could find. This new contractor was based out of Denver, over 40 minutes away, and they clearly did not prioritize our small subdivision. But I kept my mouth shut. I was not about to volunteer any information or help. I had tried to be helpful, tried to be proactive, and I had been fined for it. Now they could deal with the consequences of their own rules. February 11th brought another winter storm. Not as bad as the first one, just 4 inches, but it fell on top of the existing ice layer on the walkways, making them even more treacherous. I cleared my driveway and sidewalk at 7 a.m. exactly. I watched as the snow continued to pile up on the common area walkways, and I went back inside to work. That afternoon, another person fell on the main walkway. This time it was serious. A woman named Janet, who I did not know well but had seen around the neighborhood, was trying to take a shortcut through the north walkway. She hit a patch of ice hidden under the new snow, went down hard and broke her wrist. The ambulance came, lights flashing, drawing attention from everyone in the neighborhood. People came out of their houses to see what was happening. I watched from my window as the EMT stabilized Janet's arm and loaded her into the ambulance. Within an hour, there was an emergency meeting called by several residents. It was not an official HOA meeting, just a gathering of angry neighbors who wanted answers. I decided to attend. The meeting was held at the community center, the same place where I had my hearing about the stupid fine. About 40 people showed up, which was a significant portion of our neighborhood. Brenda was there, looking defensive and angry. Tom and Linda were there too, flanking her like bodyguards. Nicole Harris, the mother of the boy who got hit by the car, stood up first. "This is unacceptable," she started, her voice shaking with anger. "My son was injured because he had to walk in the street because the walkways that the HOA is supposed to maintain were not cleared. Now Janet is on her way to the hospital with a broken wrist because those same walkways are covered in ice. What is going on?" Brenda stood up, her face flushed. "We have been working with our contractor to address the situation. The weather has been unusual, and we have faced some challenges." "Challenges?" A man I recognized but did not know by name stood up. "The challenge is that you are not doing your job. We pay HOA fees specifically for maintenance like this. Where is that money going if not to keep our walkways safe?" "Our budget is allocated according to the priorities determined by the board," Brenda said stiffly. "We have expenses throughout the year, and we must balance those needs." Pete, my neighbor, raised his hand. "Brenda, in previous years, the walkways were always cleared within 24 hours of a snowstorm." "What changed?" Brenda hesitated, and I saw Linda lean over to whisper something to her. "We changed contractors to a more cost-effective service," Brenda finally admitted. "Cost-effective." Nicole's voice rose. "You mean cheap? You hired the cheapest contractor you could find, and now people are getting hurt because of it." The room erupted in agreement. People were angry, and Brenda was losing control of the situation. "I want to call for a vote of no confidence," someone yelled from the back. "That is not how this works," Brenda snapped back. "You cannot just call for votes in an impromptu meeting. There are procedures." "Then tell us the procedures," Pete said calmly. "Tell us how we can hold the board accountable when they are clearly not fulfilling their responsibilities." Brenda looked like she wanted to refuse, but with 40 angry residents staring at her, she did not have much choice. According to the bylaws, a special election to remove a board member requires a petition signed by 30% of homeowners, followed by a vote requiring a simple majority. But I want to make it clear that I have done nothing wrong. I am following the budget and guidelines that were approved by this community. "When were they approved?" I asked, speaking up for the first time. Brenda's eyes locked onto me. "Excuse me. When were the budget and guidelines that allowed you to hire a substandard contractor approved by the community?" "The budget is approved annually at the general meeting." which nobody attends because you schedule it at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon when everyone is at work, Nicole interjected. That was true. I had received the notice about the last general meeting but could not attend because of my job. Looking around the room, I suspected most of these people had been in the same situation. The meeting times are posted according to the bylaws, Brenda said defensively. And the bylaws can be changed if the community votes on it, Pete said. I think we need some serious changes around here. The meeting went on for another hour, with people voicing their frustrations and Brenda deflecting blame at every turn. By the end, a group had formed to draft a petition for a vote of no confidence in the current board. Nicole volunteered to organize it, and people lined up to give her their contact information. I signed up too. I might have been willing to stay out of it before, but watching Brenda squirm and deflect was satisfying enough to draw me in. Over the next week, Nicole and her group worked fast. They went door to door, explaining what had happened, showing pictures of the dangerous walkways and gathering signatures. The petition needed signatures from at least 30% of the homeowners, which meant about 65 signatures out of the 215 homes in Pinewood Grove. They got 93 signatures in 5 days. Brenda tried to fight it. She sent out an email blast to all residents claiming that the petition was based on misinformation and that the board had acted appropriately. She tried to schedule the special election for 8 weeks out, but the bylaws clearly stated it had to be held within 4 weeks of a valid petition being submitted. The election was scheduled for March 10th. In the meantime, the walkway situation came to a head. Janet, the woman who broke her wrist, hired a lawyer. She sent a letter to the HOA stating her intent to sue for medical expenses and damages due to negligence. The lawyer argued that the HOA had failed in its duty to maintain safe common areas, and that this failure had directly resulted in his client's injury. Brenda called an emergency board meeting, which I attended along with about 30 other residents. The meetings were technically open to homeowners, though most people never bothered to show up. That was changing now. We have received a letter from an attorney representing Janet Morrison, Brenda began, her voice tight. She is alleging negligence and is seeking damages. Is she right? Someone asked. Were we negligent? Brenda bristled. I believe we acted appropriately given the circumstances. The circumstances being that you hired a contractor who did not do their job, Nicole said sharply. The contractor faced equipment issues. That is not something we could have predicted. Did you have a backup plan? Did you have a clause in the contract requiring them to clear the walkways within a certain time frame? Brenda did not answer, which was answer enough. Tom, the treasurer who barely ever spoke, cleared his throat. We need to contact our liability insurance. This is what it is for. Our liability insurance has a $10,000 deductible, Linda said quietly. And if they pay out, our premiums will go up. How much are Janet's medical expenses? Pete asked. I do not know yet, Brenda admitted. But a broken wrist, emergency room visit, probably some physical therapy. It could be 15 to 20,000. The room went quiet as people did the math. The HOA would have to pay the $10,000 deductible and then face increased insurance premiums for years to come. All because they tried to save a few $100s on a snow removal contractor. There is also the matter of the boy who was hit by a car, someone pointed out. Are his parents going to sue too? I do not know, Brenda said. She looked tired, older than she had just a few weeks ago. As it turned out, Jason's parents did not sue, but they did file a formal complaint with the HOA and demanded that the dangerous conditions be addressed immediately. They sent copies of their complaint to every homeowner, along with photos of Jason's bruises and a detailed account of the incident. The contractor was fired, and Brenda scrambled to find a replacement. She ended up hiring back Dave, the original contractor who had been let go to save money. Dave was professional about it, but I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that he charged them a premium to come back on short notice. The walkways were finally cleared properly on February 20th, more than 2 weeks after the original storm. By then, the damage to the HOA board's reputation was done. The election on March 10th was a landslide. All 3 board members, Brenda, Tom, and Linda, were removed by a vote of 78% of homeowners. It was the highest turnout for any HOA election in Pinewood Grove's history. New board members were elected. Nicole Harris became the new president. Pete became vice president. A woman named Sarah, who worked as an accountant, became treasurer. They ran on a platform of transparency, accountability, and common sense. One of their first acts was to revoke the ridiculous rule about snow removal hours. The new rule stated that homeowners were encouraged to clear snow and ice from their property as soon as safely possible, regardless of time, as long as they were not using loud power equipment before 7 a.m. They also hired a law firm to review all the fines that had been issued over the past year under Brenda's reign. My $50 fine for shoveling before sunrise was refunded, along with dozens of other questionable fines that Brenda had issued for minor infractions. But the biggest change came when the new board did a full audit of the HOA finances. What they found was disturbing. Sarah, the new treasurer, called an emergency meeting on March 25th. I attended along with most of the neighborhood. People were curious about what she had discovered. "I am going to be direct," Sarah said, standing at the front of the room with a stack of papers in her hands. "In reviewing the financial records from the past 2 years, I have found multiple irregularities. There are expenses that do not make sense, missing receipts, and some transactions that I cannot account for." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. "How much are we talking about?" someone asked. "Approximately $38,000 over the past 2 years. The murmurs turned into outright gasps and angry shouts. "Where did the money go?" Nicole asked, her face pale. "That is what we need to find out. Some of it appears to have been paid to vendors for services that were never rendered. Some of it was withdrawn as reimbursements for expenses that were never properly documented, and some of it I simply cannot trace." "Who authorized these transactions?" Pete demanded. "All of them were authorized by Brenda as president, with countersignature from either Tom or Linda." Someone yelled out, "They embezzled from us." "We do not know that yet," Sarah said, holding up her hands, "but we are going to find out. I have already contacted a forensic accountant, and we will be conducting a thorough investigation. If there is evidence of criminal activity, we will be contacting the police." The meeting dissolved into chaos. People were furious, betrayed, demanding immediate action. Nicole and Sarah managed to calm everyone down enough to explain the process. The forensic accountant would review everything, trace the missing money, and determine what had happened. It would take time, but they would get answers. Over the next 3 weeks, the investigation proceeded. The forensic accountant, a woman named Dr. Alina Chen, was thorough and professional. She requested documents, interviewed the former board members, and followed every financial trail. Brenda initially refused to cooperate, claiming harassment. But when Dr. Chen found evidence that Brenda had paid her personal snow removal contractor using HOA funds and had reimbursed herself for expenses that included personal shopping trips and restaurant meals, the new board had no choice but to take action. On April 16th, Nicole and Sarah met with a detective from the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. They presented all the evidence that Dr. Chen had compiled. The detective, a man named Ramirez, reviewed the documents carefully. "This is enough for me to open an investigation," he said. "If what you are showing me is accurate, we are looking at theft, fraud, and possibly embezzlement. These are serious charges. We just want our money back," Nicole said, "and we want to make sure this never happens again." "I understand. I will need to speak with the former board members and the accountant. This will take some time." The investigation became official. Detective Ramirez interviewed Brenda, Tom, and Linda separately. Tom and Linda, it turned out, were not involved in the theft itself. They had just been negligent in their oversight, signing off on things without really looking at them because they trusted Brenda. They were still potentially liable, but the criminal investigation focused primarily on Brenda. When confronted with the evidence, Brenda tried to claim that she had made some mistakes but had not intended to steal anything. She said the reimbursements were legitimate and that she had receipts for everything, but she did not have receipts. Or rather, she had receipts that did not match the amount she had claimed. A receipt for a $20 lunch at a local cafe had been submitted for reimbursement at $200. A receipt for a $150 repair to her personal vehicle had been submitted as a maintenance expense for community equipment. The pattern was clear. Brenda had been systematically inflating expenses and pocketing the difference for nearly 2 years. On May 2nd, Brenda Patterson was arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The total amount she had stolen was determined to be $42,000, even more than the initial estimate. The news spread through Pinewood Grove like wildfire. People were shocked, angry, and vindicated. The woman who had been so obsessed with enforcing petty rules, who had fined people for minor infractions, who had acted like she was better than everyone else, was a criminal. Brenda posted bail and was released pending trial. She kept a low profile, rarely leaving her house. Her husband, a quiet man named Richard, who I had only seen a handful of times, filed for divorce shortly after her arrest. The legal process ground forward slowly. Brenda's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney was not interested in going easy on her. The case was solid, the evidence was overwhelming, and the community wanted justice. The trial was scheduled for September. In the meantime, life in Pinewood Grove improved dramatically under the new board. The walkways were maintained properly. Communication improved, with regular email updates and a revamped website where homeowners could easily access information. The arbitrary enforcement of petty rules stopped, replaced by a more reasonable approach focused on genuine safety and property maintenance. I started shoveling my driveway and sidewalk at 5:30 in the morning again, whenever it snowed, and nobody said a word about it. In fact, several of my neighbors thanked me for keeping the sidewalk clear. The trial began on September 15th. I attended several days of it, curious to see how it would play out. Brenda sat at the defense table looking small and defeated, nothing like the imperious HOA president who had patrolled our neighborhood looking for violations. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Dr. Chen testified about the financial irregularities she had discovered. Detective Ramirez testified about his investigation. Nicole and Sarah testified about the impact on the community. The defense tried to argue that Brenda had made honest mistakes, that she had been overwhelmed by the responsibilities of the position, that she had not intended to steal. But the evidence was too strong. The receipts, the false reimbursements, the payments to vendors for services never rendered, it all painted a clear picture of intentional fraud. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Brenda broke down crying when the verdict was read. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but there was nothing he could do. She was convicted. Sentencing was scheduled for October 20th. The prosecution asked for significant prison time, arguing that Brenda had been in a position of trust and had violated that trust for personal gain. The defense asked for probation and restitution, arguing that Brenda was a first-time offender who had already suffered enough with the public humiliation and divorce. Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to Janet as far as I knew, was not sympathetic. Mrs. Patterson, the judge said, looking down at Brenda from the bench. You were elected by your neighbors to manage their community. They trusted you. They paid fees with the expectation that you would use those funds appropriately. Instead, you stole from them. You used your position to enrich yourself while hiding behind a facade of rules and regulations. You fined residents for minor infractions while you were committing felonies. I find your conduct to be egregious and deserving of substantial punishment. The judge sentenced Brenda to 4 years in prison, with credit for time served, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $42,000 plus interest, and to cover the costs of the forensic accounting investigation. Brenda was taken into custody immediately. I watched as the bailiff led her out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice had been served, but sadness that it had come to this at all. After the sentencing, a group of us from the neighborhood went out to lunch. Nicole, Pete, Sarah, and a handful of others who had been involved in the effort to remove the old board and uncover the fraud. We sat in a booth at a local restaurant and talked about everything that had happened. I still cannot believe it, Pete said, shaking his head. I mean, I knew Brenda could be difficult, but I never thought she was a thief. Power corrupts, Sarah said quietly. She started with good intentions maybe, but somewhere along the way she convinced herself that she deserved that money. Do you think we will get the money back? Someone asked. Sarah shrugged. Some of it, maybe. She will have to pay restitution as part of her sentence, but it will probably take years and we might not get all of it. It is not really about the money anymore, Nicole said. It is about making sure this never happens again. We have new processes in place, checks and balances, actual oversight. That is worth more than $42,000. I raised my glass. To new beginnings and common sense. Everyone clinked glasses and drank to that. Life in Pinewood Grove settled into a comfortable routine after that. The new HOA board was responsive and reasonable. They focused on real issues rather than petty rule enforcement. They maintained the common areas properly. They communicated clearly with residents. Winter came around again, and when the first snowstorm hit in December, I was up at 5:30 in the morning clearing my driveway and sidewalk just like always. By 7 a.m., my property was clear, and so were the main walkways. Dave the contractor had been there at 6 with his truck and crew, clearing everything efficiently. I saw several of my neighbors out early too, shoveling their own properties. We waved to each other in the dim morning light, doing what needed to be done without fear of arbitrary fines or reprisals. By 8 a.m., when kids started heading to their bus stops and people left for work, every walkway in Pinewood Grove was clear and safe. Nobody slipped, nobody fell, nobody had to walk in the street dodging cars. It was exactly how it was supposed to be. I thought about Brenda sometimes, sitting in prison for the next few years, paying for her crimes. I thought about how different things could have been if she had just been reasonable, if she had focused on helping the community instead of controlling it, if she had not let her petty desire for power corrupt her into a criminal. But mostly, I just enjoyed living in a neighborhood that finally made sense, where the rules existed to help people, not to generate revenue or feed someone's ego, where people could shovel their sidewalks at 5 in the morning without fear of being fined. The whole experience taught me something important about community governance and human nature. HOAs are not inherently bad. They serve a purpose, maintaining property values and common areas, ensuring a baseline of standards. But they are only as good as the people running them. When small-minded, power-hungry people get control, they can make everyone's life miserable. When reasonable, community-focused people are in charge, things work the way they should. I also learned that standing up to petty tyrants is worth it. If I had not let those walkways become sheets of ice, if I had just paid my fine and shut up about it, Brenda would still be running Pinewood Grove into the ground and stealing from all of us. Sometimes, malicious compliance and strategic inaction are the most effective forms of resistance. Pete and I were standing in my driveway one Saturday afternoon in January, about a year after the whole thing started, watching kids sled down the hill in the community park. The walkways were clear, the sun was shining, and everything was peaceful. "You know," Pete said, "you really started something when you stopped clearing those walkways." I laughed. I did not stop clearing them. They were not my responsibility. I just followed the rules exactly as they were written. Still, if you had not done that, if you had just cleared them anyway like you used to, we might never have found out what Brenda was doing. Maybe. But somebody would have figured it out eventually. The money would have run out or someone would have asked the right questions. I just accelerated the timeline. "Well, I am glad you did. This neighborhood is so much better now." I agreed completely. The irony was not lost on me that Brenda's obsession with enforcing a stupid rule about snow removal hours had ultimately led to her downfall. If she had just let me shovel at 5 in the morning, if she had not been so determined to fine me for helping, I never would have paid such close attention to what the HOA was doing. I never would have noticed the pattern of neglect with the common areas. I never would have been motivated to get involved when things went sideways. Her petty tyranny created her own worst enemy, me. February came around again, marking the anniversary of that first big snowstorm. We got another 10 inches overnight, and I was out at 5:30 clearing my driveway. By 6, Dave and his crew were clearing the main walkways. By 7:30, everything was done. I stood in my cleared driveway with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over Pinewood Grove. My neighborhood looked beautiful, covered in fresh snow, safe and well-maintained, managed by people who actually cared about the community. I thought about sending Brenda a letter in prison, telling her how much better everything was without her, but I decided against it. She knew. I am sure she knew. And that was punishment enough on top of the 4 years she was serving. Instead, I went inside, started my workday, and lived my life in a community that finally made sense. No more arbitrary rules, no more petty enforcement, no more tyrants masquerading as concerned neighbors. Just a neighborhood where you could shovel your driveway before sunrise without being fined, where the walkways were safe to walk on, and where the people in charge actually did their jobs. It was everything it should have been from the beginning. And all it took was letting those walkways become sheets of ice and watching the consequences unfold. Sometimes, the best way to fight a broken system is to follow its rules so precisely that the cracks become impossible to ignore. Brenda built that system to control people, but in the end, it trapped her instead. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to justice, common sense, and the power of malicious compliance. Life was good in Pinewood Grove, exactly as it should be. The spring brought even more positive changes. The new HOA board organized a community cleanup day where everyone came out to pick up winter debris, plant flowers in the common areas, and repaint the community center. It was the first time in years that people actually wanted to participate in an HOA event, and the turnout was remarkable. Nicole proved to be an excellent president. She was organized, fair, and actually listened to residents when they had concerns. She instituted monthly board meetings that were scheduled for 6 p.m. so people could actually attend after work. She created an online portal where residents could submit maintenance requests and track their progress. She was everything Brenda was not: transparent, accountable, and genuinely interested in serving the community rather than ruling it. The financial situation improved too. Sarah, the treasurer, implemented new controls that required dual authorization for any expense over $500 and mandatory documentation for all reimbursements. She published quarterly financial reports that were clear and easy to understand, showing exactly where every dollar of HOA fees was being spent. The mystery and suspicion that had surrounded the HOA's finances under Brenda disappeared. By summer, you would hardly recognize Pinewood Grove as the same neighborhood that had been tearing itself apart just months earlier. People were friendlier, more engaged, more willing to help each other out. The atmosphere of fear and resentment that Brenda had created was gone, replaced by an actual sense of community. I became more involved myself, joining the architectural review committee that approved requests for home modifications. It was a volunteer position, and the work was straightforward. Review the request, make sure it complied with reasonable aesthetic guidelines, approve it. We processed more requests in 3 months than Brenda's board had in a year, and we denied fewer because we were not looking for reasons to say no. One day in July, I got a letter in the mail from the district attorney's office. It was an update on the restitution situation. Brenda had begun making payments from prison, working in the kitchen for pennies an hour, and sending every cent to the restitution fund. Her ex-husband Richard had also voluntarily contributed $10,000, presumably out of guilt or embarrassment. The HOA had recovered about $18,000 so far, with more expected over time. It was not the full amount, but it was something. And more importantly, it showed that there were consequences for abusing a position of trust. Other HOA boards in the area had taken notice of what happened in Pinewood Grove, and from what I heard, several of them had implemented new oversight measures to prevent similar situations. August brought a heat wave, and the community pool became the center of social life in the neighborhood. The new board had allocated funds to repair and upgrade the pool area, which had been neglected under Brenda's leadership. New lounge chairs, fresh paint, updated equipment, it was like a different place. I was at the pool one Saturday afternoon when Nicole came over and sat down next to me. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not letting it go. When you got that fine for shoveling, you could have just paid it and moved on. But you fought it, and when that did not work, you found another way to resist. If you had not done that, if you had just cleared those walkways anyway, even though they were not your responsibility, we might never have forced the issue with Brenda." "I was just being petty," I said honestly. "I was mad about the fine and I wanted to make a point. Maybe. But your pettiness saved this community. Sometimes pettiness is exactly what is needed." I thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was a time and place for being petty, for refusing to go along with unreasonable demands, for insisting on fairness even when it was easier to just comply. "Well, I am glad it worked out," I said. "Me too. And if you ever want to run for the board, let me know. We could use people like you," I laughed. I think I am fine as a volunteer, but thanks." Fall came, and with it the 1-year anniversary of the special election that had changed everything. The current board was up for re-election, and all 3 members ran again. They won by overwhelming margins. People were happy with the job they were doing and did not want to rock the boat. I voted for all 3 of them, proud to support a board that actually served the community. October 20th arrived, and I realized it had been exactly a year since Brenda's sentencing. I checked online and saw that she was still incarcerated, serving her time at a correctional facility in Cannon City. She would be eligible for parole in another year if she had good behavior. Part of me wondered what she thought about sitting in prison. Did she regret her actions? Did she understand how her behavior had hurt people? Or did she still think she was the victim, persecuted for trying to enforce the rules I would probably never know, and that was fine? She was not my problem anymore. Winter returned, completing the cycle. The first snowstorm of the season hit in November, and I was ready. I had a new shovel, a good pair of insulated gloves, and the complete freedom to clear my property whenever I wanted. The snow started falling around midnight. By 5 a.m., there were 6 inches on the ground. I got up, got dressed, and went outside to start shoveling. The air was cold and crisp. The snow was perfect for shoveling, and I worked steadily in the dim light of my porch lamp and headlamp. By 6:15, my driveway and sidewalk were clear. By 6:30, Dave and his crew were working on the main walkways. By 7 a.m., when the sun started to rise and people began their days, Pinewood Grove was clear and safe. No ice. No accidents. No complaints. Just a community that worked the way it was supposed to, maintained by people who cared, governed by rules that made sense. I went inside, made coffee, and sat by my front window watching the neighborhood wake up. Kids bundled in winter coats trudged to the bus stop on clear sidewalks. The mail carrier made her rounds without slipping. An elderly couple walked their dog along the main path, chatting and laughing. Everything was as it should be. I thought about the journey that had brought us here. A stupid fine for shoveling snow too early. A deliberate decision to let the HOA's negligence become visible. The injuries and near misses that had forced the community to take action. The investigation that had uncovered Brenda's crimes. The trial, the sentencing, the rebuilding. It had been a long road, but we had made it. Pinewood Grove was not perfect, but it was so much better than it had been. And I had played a role in that transformation, even if it had started with something as petty as refusing to clear a walkway that was not my responsibility. Sometimes, the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes, following the rules to the letter exposes how broken those rules really are. And sometimes, letting things fall apart is necessary before they can be rebuilt correctly. I had learned all of that over the past year and a half, and I was grateful for the lessons even though they had been hard-won. As I sat there with my coffee, watching the sun climb higher over the snow-covered neighborhood, my phone buzzed with a text from Pete. "Great job on your sidewalk this morning. Thanks for always being on top of it." I smiled and typed back, "Just being a good neighbor." And that was the truth. After all the drama, all the conflict, all the upheaval, it really did come down to something that simple: being a good neighbor. Helping out. Doing what needed to be done without waiting for someone to tell you to do it or threatening to fine you if you did it wrong. Brenda had never understood that. She had seen the HOA as a way to control people, to enforce her vision of how things should be, to punish those who did not fall in line. She had forgotten, or maybe never knew, that a community is not built on rules and fines. It is built on trust, cooperation, and people genuinely trying to help each other. The new board understood that. They created rules that made sense and enforced them fairly. They spent money on things that actually mattered. They communicated openly and honestly. They trusted residents to do the right thing, and most people did. It was not complicated. It was actually very simple. But it required people in charge who cared more about the community than about power. December brought more snow, and each time, the same routine played out. I would wake up early, clear my property, and Dave would clear the common areas. The neighborhood stayed safe and functional. There were no complaints, no fines, no drama. Just a community working together the way it should. Christmas came and went. The neighborhood looked beautiful with lights and decorations. The HOA had even organized a decorating contest, but it was optional and fun, not mandatory and punitive like things had been under Brenda. New Year's arrived, marking 2 full years since I had gotten that ridiculous fine for shoveling snow before sunrise. 2 years since I had started down this path of resistance and reform. I stood in my driveway on New Year's Day, under clear blue skies, looking at the neighborhood I had helped transform. Not alone, of course. Nicole, Pete, Sarah, and dozens of others had done the real work, but I had played my part, and I was proud of that. As I turned to go back inside, I saw a moving truck pull up to Brenda's old house. A young family climbed out, parents and 2 small kids, looking excited about their new home. They had no idea about the history of this place, about the woman who had lived here before, about the drama that had unfolded. To them, it was just a nice house in a nice neighborhood, and they were right. It was a nice neighborhood now. I walked over to introduce myself, to welcome them to Pinewood Grove, to let them know that if they ever needed anything, I was right up the street. Because that is what good neighbors do. And in this neighborhood, finally, after everything that had happened, that is what we all were. Good neighbors, living in a good community, under good leadership, with good rules that made sense. It was everything I had wanted when I first moved here 3 years ago. It had just taken a snowstorm, a stupid fine, some sheets of ice, and the spectacular downfall of a petty tyrant to get here. But we had arrived, and it was worth it. I shook hands with the new neighbors, helped them carry a few boxes inside, and told them about the neighborhood. The good restaurants nearby, the great hiking trails, the community events. I did not tell them about Brenda. That was history, buried and gone. I told them about the present, about the future, about the community we were building together. And as I walked back to my house, I felt a profound sense of contentment. Sometimes, justice takes time. Sometimes, it takes letting things break before they can be fixed. Sometimes, it takes refusing to solve problems that are not yours to solve. But eventually, if enough people care, if enough people stand up, if enough people refuse to accept tyranny disguised as rules, things get better. Pinewood Grove got better. And I got to watch it happen, participate in it, even help cause it in some small way. That was enough, more than enough. I went inside my house, made lunch, and started thinking about what I wanted to do with the rest of my day. Maybe I would go for a walk on the clear, safe walkways that were properly maintained now. Maybe I would sit by the fire and read a book. Maybe I would call Pete and see if he wanted to grab dinner. Whatever I did, I would do it as a resident of a neighborhood that finally made sense, that finally valued people over petty rules, that finally understood what community really meant. And if it snowed tomorrow, I would wake up at 5:30 in the morning and clear my sidewalk without fear or hesitation. Because that is what good neighbors do, and in Pinewood Grove, we were all good neighbors now. The story of how I fought back against an unjust HOA fine by simply following the rules they had created had come to its conclusion. Justice was served. The community was healed. Life went on better than before. And somewhere in a prison in Cannon City, Brenda Patterson was learning that actions have consequences, and that petty tyranny always, eventually, collapses under its own weight. As for me, I was just a guy who lived in a nice neighborhood, who shoveled his driveway early when it snowed, and who had accidentally helped bring down a corrupt HOA board by refusing to do more than he was required to do. It was a strange way to become a neighborhood hero, but I would take it. And every time it snowed, every time I went out at 5:30 in the morning with my shovel and headlamp, I would remember the journey that had brought us here, from a single, unjust fine to sheets of ice, to arrests and trials, to a completely transformed community. All because I decided that if the HOA wanted to enforce stupid rules, they could deal with the consequences of their own policies. Malicious compliance had never felt so good or been so effective. And as I settled into my comfortable chair with a warm drink, watching the winter sun set over Pinewood Grove, I smiled. Life was good. The neighborhood was good. Justice had been served. And tomorrow, if it snowed, I would be out there at 5:30 in the morning, shoveling away, exactly as I should be, no fines. No drama, no tyranny, just a good neighbor doing what good neighbors do in a community that finally understood what that meant. The end of one story and the beginning of a much better one. And I was here to see it all, to live it all, to be part of it all. That was more than enough. That was everything.